Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. And today we have with us Ablorde Ashigbi, who is the founder and CEO of 4Degrees. Ablorde, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
Hey, so I know that you focus on relationship building, relationship management, and I really want to dive into that, but give us a little bit of your background. What led you to this field of study, and what is 4Degrees focusing on with your clients?
Yeah, and so this journey began through a career of being in relationship-driven industries. So before becoming a technology entrepreneur, I actually was on the other side of the table investing in early-stage technology companies. And then before then, worked at a large management consulting firm. And two very different businesses, but one of the things that underpinned them and was common across both of them were that relationships fundamentally drove those businesses. And so in the world of venture, for instance, our ability to find interesting companies to invest in, to diligence those deals appropriately, and then once invested, help those companies find customers and talent and next round investors was a function of the relationship network of the firm. And then in consulting, the folks who are probably listening to this are aware of your ability to land customers and maintain them over time and ultimately turn them into long-standing engagements is very much a relationship building and management effort. And yet we consistently found in both of those roles that most people were doing that work in systems that were primarily built to manage a transaction, right? So like a sales conversation, which works in some contexts, but there were plenty of other relationships that really mattered to those businesses that those systems weren't built to hold very well. And so people then defaulted that into Excel systems and Airtable bases and Outlook notes and the like. And so we saw an opportunity to build a product that we wished we had. And so that is essentially the genesis of what 4Degrees has become. And so today we're a software product sold into a set of relationship-driven industries. So think kind of consulting, investment banking, private equity, venture capital, and we're providing them kind of products and software to help them manage the relationship network of the firm collectively. So that is both where we come from and also
I love that. That is perfect, and it's so true. Relationships are where it's at, and I want to get into how to properly use technology / AI or whatever we want to dive into without feeling like you're intruding and without losing the personal touch. But I want to make an observation on one thing you said, which is just all about the relationships, because in trying to get venture funding, I am certain that there are founders that will seek out venture capitalists or angels and reach out to them by email, by phone, by LinkedIn. And I would bet that the results of those campaigns are abysmal. But yet, when you talk to people that got funded, I wonder if it's like, well, you know what? My LinkedIn contact saw something I did. They introduced us, or we were at this networking event and I was introduced to this person. It's those connections and relationships. Most of the time, people just do not like being cold approached. And is that one of the things you found when you're in that world?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's certainly, we describe it like this idea of warm introductions being one of the most prevalent ways that people choose to do kind of investments and deals. And even within warm introductions, there's honestly like a hierarchy of like which introductions are kind of most high signal, for lack of a better term, than others. And so these relationship-driven worlds function so heavily off these kind of relationships and introductions that coming in off of other paths can oftentimes be seen as, a negative.
Yeah. And I want to now jump over into now your technology, because you went right to a technology to achieve this relationship building, as opposed to let me become a speaker and consultant and train people on developing relationships. So you're really bridging the gap between developing relationships and using digital and technology the right way. So how does that look for a user, and how does that look for someone on the other side? like as an example, and I don't know anything about your technology, so if this is the way that it is, let's talk through it. But I don't think that having automated bots flying out and sending messages to people's Facebook, Messenger account is going to be productive. But how then does your product, bridge that gap to make it seamless and feel like it is personal?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, I would 100% agree with you that the idea that sending a number of automated bulk messages to a group of people is relationship building in any context is mostly, I think, an illusion or fiction. So the way our product works is first we plug into communication channels. So that means we're plugging into email and calendar and the like. We primarily do that to actually reduce the amount of data entry one has to do to actually just keep track of the set of folks you've connected to and communicating with. You can also do the same by uploading LinkedIn data and the like. And so across all of that, what you're getting is an understanding of collectively who do you and your teammates actually know and have a relationship with. And then we apply a bunch of technology on top of that to essentially give a team back two things. The first is an enriched digital Rolodex. So think of that as, we take the email address of each person, and then we go and try to find, their pictures, names, current and prior roles, the locations that they're based in, and also do some categorization for you. That makes it really easy to search through your team's network to identify people who are either experts in certain things or who are connected to a certain company that you can use to potentially find warm introductions to that conversation you were having before to an organization you want to get to know. And then the second is that we also go and search the world for news and information about those people. Right? And so going back to this idea of authenticity, it's one thing to send 30 bulk emails out to someone saying, hey, I saw this in your profile and I really liked it. We can all sniff that out a mile away. It's another thing entirely to say, hey, I read this article that you were in recently and I thought X, Y, and Z was really compelling. Would love to have a conversation with you about that. One advances the relationship in a very meaningful and material way. The other is probably actually seen as a detriment to the relationship. And so we very much side on the side of authenticity.
The way you're describing that reminds me of the concept of 6 degrees of separation. So is there an element of, wow, I want to connect with that person. How can I get there? Well, this person knows that person who, whatever. Is there that kind of a dotted line connection as well?
Yeah. So we definitely do our best to both show you if a teammate is directly connected to someone, as well as if there are some more oblique connections to someone. So even though we were talking a little bit about the world of venture, I'll take another example from here. So let's say you happen to know a venture investor. And when you do a search and you're kind of searching for connections to a specific company, one of the things we'll be able to do is tell you if that venture investor's fund has an investment in that business. And so you can use that as a way of potentially getting there through that kind of second degree connection, so to speak. And so the name 4 Degrees is actually a little bit of a play off of the idea of 6 degrees of separation itself.
Got it. Yeah, makes total sense. And kind of carving out a name and a niche for yourself there with that approach. So that's awesome. So let's think about this. What's then the next step? So think about maybe a best practice. So you see that connection, you make that reach out, and maybe there's a little bit of a interest level. Do you then help with tools or trainings or techniques to then develop that connection into a good, vibrant relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that ties a lot into that second portion of the product that I was describing, which is that we go and search the world for ways of helping you kind of strengthen and further the relationships that you care about. And so in some cases, that will be that person has shown up in the news. In other cases, it might be the published content recently that you should be aware of. So think, that they have a personal blog or a company blog or what have you that has notable events occurring. The third is if you're actually traveling, which unfortunately today in the U.S. is a little bit of a rare occasion with shelter in place. But it will detect that from your calendar and send you a list of kind of relationships of yours that live in the destination city. And so think of all of these as intelligent notifications of ways that you can advance those relationships and where there's a little bit of that interest level and ideally move them towards either whether it's an opportunity to do business together or just maybe, a business relationship you find valuable.
And let's talk a little bit more about just the relationship side of business, because I feel like this is a wonderful foot in the door and an accelerator to stimulating those relationships. From here, what then do you recommend? So, and here's what I mean. It could be like that blast email or blast bot that we've talked about doesn't really work to develop relationship. But now you're given the tools. Back in the old days, you would hear the sales training when you're waiting for the CEO in the waiting room or his office for your meeting. Look around and see what he likes. Oh, I see a picture of a sailboat. Let's talk about sailing. So now with all the tools that are at our fingertips now with LinkedIn and social, we can see kind of what they like now. So that gives us a starting point. But using your technology, that gives a wonderful starting point. But then what? What are your recommendations on building that relationship? Because we're talking about venture. You don't just say, hi, I might give me a bunch of money. What are your thoughts that way to kind of carry that forward?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things. The first is actually just maintaining the relationship in and of itself is something that a lot of folks struggle to do, but it's critically important. So it's one thing to meet someone one time, have a level of interest, and then never talk to them again for 3 years, which can be really easy to do in today's modern economy with all the things that go on with us. And so one of the practices we've seen be most beneficial is just saying, hey, this is the person I want to make sure we're staying engaged with. And so let's just make sure once every 6 months, once every 3 months, if it's not happening organically, that we're being reminded to figure out some way or some reason to get in front of this person again. And so kind of that, that frequency of touch points over time is a kind of big driver of relationship development of its own. The second is to the conversation we were having before. It's one thing to just check in once every 6 months and say like, hey, was thinking about you, hope you're well, which is honestly better than nothing. There's another thing to actually find authentic ways of building on that relationship. And so to your point around when you've had that conversation, maybe you take a couple notes down about some of the things you've talked about in the past, some of their interests and passions. And as you're reading articles online that align with some of the things that they've mentioned as priorities or objectives, using those as opportunities to re-engage them and ideally help them move forward in things that they care about. People tend to be somewhat vain, and I certainly follow this bucket, so I'm not saying it as like outside of that. But when people do work themselves, so if they've shown up in the news, if they publish content or the like, using that as an opportunity to comment on what it is that they said or what the events that have happened around them are ways that ultimately take you from acquaintance to trusted business advisor.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it makes me wonder a follow-up question, which is staying in front of and commenting on. That's wonderful, and hey, I saw this article. What do you think about the variety and keeping a different variety of the ways to keep in touch? Because what if you're trying to keep in touch with some of these people and all you do is like, comment, share some social media and go, hey, cool post. At some point, it's like, really? Or, hey, I found this article. Okay, good. Thank you. I've got an RSS feeder myself. What are some additional ways that you can say to keep in touch with people so that it feels fresh and authentic?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, there is a variety of different tools you might use to do this. My general stance is you probably want to solve for the quality of the interaction over, the quick quantity. I do think quick quantity is better than nothing, by the way. If you're not talking to someone for a couple of years, it's better to like and to comment than to do nothing at all. But if you're stepping beyond that, I think opportunities to actually spend time with that person in person if you can. So if you're in their city, getting an opportunity to have a meal or sit down and have a coffee together, moving outside of that realm towards events that you may be holding. So if you're putting on golf outings or putting together kind of March Madness parties or the like, I think all of those create more moments where you're able to step outside of the traditional like, share, comment into understanding not only their business objectives, which naturally are critically important given a lot of these are business relationships, but also what's going on in their lives personally and allow for a deeper sort of connection than you would typically find.
Have you ever heard of the Mckay 66?
Mckay 66. I'm actually not familiar with that concept.
Have you ever read books by Harvey Mckay, the trainer?
I haven't, no.
Really, really great trainer from way, way back in the day. But his Mckay 66, he owned an envelope company. And so you'd think envelopes are a commodity, but he would train his salespeople to, and you can, I'm sure, Google this and get a PDF download of it. But they had 66 things, points of interest about a account, a customer, that he wanted his salespeople to get every single time they interact. Now, you're not going to quiz them and go, hey, Ablorde, what's your favorite this and where did you, come on, that's now just filling in the blanks. But you would have at each interaction have the goal of picking up a couple, three things just naturally in conversation so that you can do the things we're talking about. So that kind of is like a little tool or a crutch. But what are your recommendations on when you are interacting with someone, how to pick up, easily and comfortably some new information so that you can be watching out later, because it kind of can become really contrived if it's like, tell me this and how do you like that? Because then they're like, are you just reading off a list?
Yeah. You certainly don't want to come across as reading off a list. In my view, one of the kind of core elements of relationship building done well is authenticity. And so my view is, I think that the view of authenticity actually leads you back towards how you might drive a conversation in a way that helps you pick up that sort of information. So for instance, nowadays with everyone filtering in place, I think it's really easy to lead conversations towards how people are dealing with the pandemic. And in doing so, you learn a little bit more about what their family structure is like and what their home is like. You get to go a little bit more about how they spend their time outside of work, because to some extent work and home are inexorably fused at the moment. And so I think there are actually become a bunch of organic opportunities to learn that information here. I think in the standard business environment, I think there still are opportunities to ask very similar sorts of questions where, instead of coming up and say, hey, what do? You can start with like, hey, what do you do outside of work? And
what do
use
you do
those
for fun?
opportunities to build exactly. And use those to build very different sorts of relationships that don't necessarily feel like you're prying for very specific kinds of information.
Yeah. And isn't it also kind of like people respond in kind, or the principle of reciprocity, meaning like, hey, I'm Mike Saunders. And then that person that you're talking to would give their first and last name. Or if it's like, hey, I'm Mike, then you would typically get their first name. So maybe if it's you use what's going on in your life, at the time of this recording, we just came off of Labor Day. So, like, hey, I just spent a long weekend up in the mountains riding ATVs with my family. And then maybe that person is like, oh, cool, we went out. And I think that's making it natural and volunteering things then on your own. Because what if you are just business 100% and then you're asking all these personal things, then they don't feel congruency either.
Yes, no, absolutely. And in fact, it actually leads to a different point that I was going to touch on, which is I think vulnerability is something that we don't talk a lot about in business, but ultimately I think leads to the strongest sorts of relationships. I think it's very easy to put on the front that everything is, easy, and that, you're killing it, the business is doing awesome, you're coming after record month after record month. And like just statistically, that's just not true. It's implausible for that to always be the case. And yet I think it's, I think there's very much a culture in American business of showing no weakness. And I think by letting your own guard down, there's an opportunity to have the other person feel like they can do the same, to your point around reciprocity, but ultimately move the conversation and the relationship to a different level than most business relationships.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of like the old golden rule, do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. So how do you want to be approached or communicated with? And I think if we think about that, everyone's favorite radio station is WIIFM, what's in it for me. So we have to think about our interactions as if we were being interacted with. Do I want to be asked this, 19 different questions, but, hey, 2, that feels good. That feels conversational. So I think those are super, super good points. Well, Ablorde, give us a little bit of contact information. What's the best way people can learn more about your software and reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, so they can reach me at Ablorde, so my first name at 4Degrees.ai, and our company at the same domain, so 4Degrees.ai.
Excellent. Now, we'll make sure to have those in the show notes, directly linked there so that people can click down there as well and go right there to check out your information. So I really enjoy talking with you. I love the intersection of digital, AI, and actual relationships. We can't hide behind the screen. We have to actually be human. So it was really fun talking to you about that. And if anyone listening to this is enjoying this episode and this podcast, I would really appreciate a review on iTunes. Just go to ratethispodcast.com linkedin.com/influential. Ablorde, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful talking with you today.
Thank you. You too.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.